Chapter 12. The Assassination Program. The doctor was perched on a stool beside the bar, hands working at tangled wires in his lap, though he rarely glanced down at them. He was managing to put together his electronic lockpick while simultaneously holding court. Ben found himself in an attentive semicircular group alongside Daphne, Terry, and Hornby. Even Thomas maintained an expression of polite interest. But Dorothy sat some distance away, her arms folded sulkily. "There were one or two details I couldn't quite get to add up," the doctor explained. "Things to do with the Adlers, mostly. We know why they came here, and we also know they had the best motive for murdering Ted Matlock. But they had a perfect alibi for the time of his death. I was in their room with them," Ben reminded the others. "A few minutes ago, Dorothy said something to shed a little light on the problem. We had assumed that Neville had died while looking to retrieve his disc from its hiding place. In fact, he was taking it back there. But why? Unless he had been using it." "For what?" asked Terry. There we come across another discrepancy. The Adlers, we're told, were engaged in weapons research, and yet their field of expertise appeared to be computer programming. Dorothy saved the whole situation from a terminal in her room when Melrose's bomb threatened to bring it down. She and her so-called husband could easily have killed Matlock from just such a distance. "You mean they programmed the computer to commit murder?" Ben was revolted, astonished, and even a little embarrassed by the revelation. He remembered sitting in the Adler's room, sipping tea, while Dorothy tapped away at her keyboard as calm as anything. No wonder she had insisted on inviting him in. Like a fool, he had been testifying to her innocence ever since, acting as her unwilling dupe and throwing the others off her scent. "Precisely, Ben. Ms. Hayes was never told the nature of the Adler's weapon, and she made the perfectly logical assumption that the two discs contained its blueprints. I believe they actually hold the weapon itself, a program which can turn a computer system against a chosen victim. Mr. Matlock was electrocuted inside an elevator with nobody nearby, because the Galaxian systems themselves diverted power through the doors or the control buttons." There was a stunned silence, which was broken by Dorothy Adler's deliberate slow hand clap as she stood and crossed the room to join them. "Well done. It took you long enough, but you've arrived at the truth at last." Ben was chilled by her blatant unrepentance, but at the same time he was almost relieved. Dorothy had shown herself to be an unpleasant, ruthless woman. To find out she was the killer after all allowed him to feel more comfortable with the former suspects he had begun to think of as friends. Or more. "Of course," she continued, "under better circumstances, with more time to plan, the crime would have been untraceable. We could have loaded our program into any computer, anywhere on Earth or its outposts, and it would have found its way here." "It locates its victims too?" The doctor was altogether too appreciative for Ben's liking. Dorothy, however, seemed flattered by his interest, and she was certainly enjoying the opportunity to brag. "Almost every computer system is connected these days, Doctor. If it isn't on a network, it will no doubt have a backdoor somewhere, or its owners will visit websites and collect messages from across the world. Our program can find its way around all those access points. It leaps from system to system at a phenomenal speed, collecting information until it is sure of its victim's location. Then it will strike, with whatever means are available. There is no escape." "You'd have to abandon civilization altogether?" the doctor breathed, struck by the magnitude of her achievement. "Even then, it could narrow down your position and send a drone to do the job. It might take some time, but I can promise you, once your details are entered into the assassination program, you're dead." "It's a very clever piece of work," the doctor complimented her. "A very clever piece of work indeed." Then his demeanour changed in an instant as he spat, "And an unconscionable abomination." "It's a work of genius, Doctor. My colleague and I have earned a place in history. We have perfected the ultimate murder weapon. Well, I hope you're proud of yourself." "I am," said Dorothy smugly. "Very proud." "Who are you going to... Polly couldn't say the word. Nor could Mace seem to answer. He cast his eyes downward, even as the Salation leader interceded. "Be silent," it commanded, "and resume your task. I am anxious to see how our acquisition functions." "Why can't you do it yourself?" Polly challenged, the hopeless situation forcing a mutinous spirit to rise within her. "The assassination program will be adapted to run on our superior computers. For now, the air breather's spindly fingers are best suited to this primitive human system." "I've installed the program," Mace reported, his voice quivering slightly. "Then activate it." He nodded obediently and input a series of commands. His clumsy two-fingered typing was unbearably slow, and Polly was uncomfortably aware of the Salation's laboured breathing as she watched and waited. I have to define a target now." "Then do so." Mace tried not to react, but he was a little too straight-faced and tight-jawed to appear wholly unaffected by the callous instruction. A pulse rippled the skin of his flabby neck. "Do so," the leader repeated, with more force this time. He swallowed and stalled. "It's asking for all kinds of details: name, height, weight, distinguishing features." Polly looked at the screen, but could only see a string of indecipherable characters. It was some futuristic computer code, she decided. How long would the Salations employ her, and keep her alive, if she couldn't interpret something so apparently basic for this era? "It needs only enough details to differentiate its victim from other plankton," the leader said impatiently. "Choose your subject and give it what information you have." Mace's fingers hovered over the keyboard, and he seemed to be willing himself to obey. But again he wavered. "I only met these people today. I don't even know the real names of some of them." "You know the current location of all. Along with an assumed name, that should be adequate. Complete your task without further delay, or you will perish and the other human will take over." Polly shivered at the thought, and wondered what she would do in such a position. She couldn't condemn a living, breathing human being to death. She just couldn't. She remembered how, even as a schoolgirl, she had felt a warm glow of pride when her country all but abolished the death penalty. The doctor had reinforced her belief that all life was sacrosanct. She would rather die, she concluded, than take a life herself. In Mace's case, however, the threat had overridden what few principles he might have had. She wanted desperately to know what he was telling the computer to do. To her, though, it seemed he was pressing random keys, inputting gibberish. When he had finished, he sat back with sweat glistening on his forehead. He at least had the decency to look ashamed. "I've done it," he said unhappily. "I gave you the disc, and now I've done your dirty work for you too. Will you let me go now?" "You are untrustworthy human scum," growled the Salation leader. "What made you believe you were worthy of existence?" It raised its gun, and Mace had less than a second to draw breath for a scream of terror before it shot him at point-blank range through the head. For an instant, it was dark in the interplanetary bar. Of them all, only the Doctor and Dorothy fully realized what the brief power failure presaged. The latter froze in wary anticipation, while the former leapt up frenziedly and brushed the components of his almost completed sonic device from his lap. He had hoped for more time than this. As always, the Salations had been too efficient for his liking. "Stay close together," he instructed. "They've activated the weapon, haven't they?" said Ben. "I'm afraid so. Thomas?" "I have no knowledge of anything amiss, sir. No, I didn't think you would have. But for a moment there, your central processing unit was too busy with an enormous influx of data to attend to its other responsibilities." "If you say so, sir. And incidentally, Ms. Wright has just been escorted out of the office on deck B1. Is Mace still with her? Asked Hornby. I can no longer detect his heat signature. They've killed him! Cried Ben. Daphne gasped in shock realization. The lights flickered just before Matlock. Indeed. Now, form a circle, everyone, back to back, and link arms. Hurry! But, Doctor, they've killed Mace. I know, Ben, and there's nothing we can do. But Polly! Ms. Wright is heading once more towards the stairs, reported Thomas. There you are, Ben. She's safe for the moment. Now, please do as I ask. Ben hesitated, but did as he was bidden, holding out his arms for Daphne and Terry to take. Hornby followed suit, but Dorothy shook her head derisively. What do you think you're trying to do? I'm trusting that even you have enough basic compassion to have included a few safeguards, said the doctor. Or will your program go after its victim, regardless of the cost? It will be careful not to harm another human being. He was glad to hear it. In which case, I suggest you join us. Or has it not occurred to you that you're the Salation's most likely target? He extended his arm towards the scientist and, losing her nerve, she scampered over and inserted herself into the chain. He had lied to her, of course. He had constantly defied the aliens since their arrival, marking himself out as the group's primary agitator. In part, it was simply his nature to stand up to those who would ride roughshod over the rights of others to peaceful existence. He also felt it his responsibility, though, to draw trouble from those less able to cope with it than himself, including his companions. He actually hoped he was the computer's intended victim. If it was anybody else, he wasn't sure he could save them. So far, at least, they were all alive, and he had brought himself time. Dorothy clung to his right arm, Hornby to his left, and the uncomfortable circle swayed as any one of its constituents shifted his or her balance. Ms. Wright is now on the docking level, said Thomas presently. With the silence thus broken, Ben spoke up too, interrupting the doctor's cogitation. What's all this in aid of, anyway? Safety in numbers, Ben. The hotel's computer is now primed to kill one of us, but there's no way of knowing who. So long as we remain in contact like this, it will find its job difficult. It can't use gas, it can't even cut off life support. According to Dorothy, it won't do anything to endanger the rest of us. And you trust her? Protested Terry. She's staking her life on it. Oh, this is horrible, whimpered Daphne. What are we going to do? Stay calm, said the doctor firmly. So long as we remain in a cluster and don't touch anything, we're reasonably safe. But we can't stay here forever, said Hornby. How are we going to get out before the station crashes? Or before those creatures hurt Polly, Ben added. The doctor was glad that no one could see his expression of uncertainty and disappointment as he confessed. I had rather hoped not to be asked those questions yet. I'm sure, said Terry dryly. But if we don't hear the answers within the next 30 minutes, we never will. Polly crossed the docking level, still sobbing quietly and surrounded by the 4 Salations, so that she had no choice but to match their pace or be crushed by them. Their leader's casual slaughter of Mace had caused her to be physically sick, but she had received no sympathy. One Salation had punched a button on the computer, and the Adler's 2 discs had popped out into its grasp. The group had then made haste towards the floor above, and Polly had been forced to accompany them. Her throat was still burning. She had to wipe her mouth on her arm, and her stomach threatened to repeat its eruption whenever she thought about Mace's corpse and the bubbling red pool where its head should have been. Her revulsion was equalled by the increasing certainty that such a fate awaited her, too. The realization that she was leaving the hotel did nothing to assuage such fears. Her captors took her through 2 ragged holes where once airlock doors had been, along a cylindrical metal tube of about 10 yards in length, and through 2 more similar doors which hung ajar. And then they were on the Salation warcraft. For a moment, she was dazzled by its unexpected elegance. They had emerged into an enormous hallway, and Polly's shoes clacked against a polished grey marble floor. The high roof was supported by fluted columns with inset golden strips. The walls were interspersed with beautiful watercolour pictures in tastefully gilded frames. The centrepiece was a huge swimming pool in which clear water sparkled and rippled to an artificial breeze. Either the Salatians had very human tastes, or this area had been deliberately designed to appeal to air-breathing visitors. The latter option made more sense. The aliens greeted their would-be business partners with courtesy and signs of opulence, before betraying them. Many white doors led off the hall, and one Salatian, the one that had captured her, she thought, although there was no way of knowing, guided her across to one of these and through. She glanced over her shoulder to see the rest of the group, its leader included, sliding into the pool. Then her view was obscured as her escort shut the door and announced, "These will be your quarters." Polly looked around the room and tried to hide an expression of distaste. It was smaller than her bedroom in the TARDIS, but the presence of a bed, table, sink, and desk, this last complete with a computer terminal, suggested that she was expected to live, work, eat, and sleep here. The surfaces had not been dusted for some time, and there was an unpleasant, damp, musty odour. A man's suit lay crumpled on the floor, and a dirty cup stood next to a crusted coffee stain on the worktop. She didn't fancy clearing out the effects of the late Brian Melrose. She would have protested about the conditions, but for her belief that the doctor would take her away from this soon. Until he did, she had to keep on the Salatian's good side. "What will my duties be?" she asked, as if she intended to perform them.
"To do as you are told.
"Oh."
In many cases, you will be responsible for our first contact with prospective partners. You will open negotiations and sometimes meet clients to execute transactions."
"And to execute the clients," Polly muttered. The comment came out louder and sounded more sarcastic than she had intended. For a moment she feared it might bring reprisals.
"I will return in 4 hours, the Salatian said. "By then, you will have familiarized yourself with our data storage system."
"Fine," said Polly, trying to sound as dutiful and efficient as she could to compensate for her slip-up. She could see no sign of a filing cabinet, though. "Where is it, then?" She realized her mistake instantly. The Salatian said nothing, and she couldn't see through its helmet, but she felt its suspicion glaring through the metal. Her eyes strayed to the grey plastic box on the table, and she concealed her fear. "The computer, I mean. Oh, there it is, right under my nose. Silly me."
"You are familiar with secretarial work?"
"Oh, absolutely," she insisted. "I was Professor Brett's personal assistant in London. He was one of our cleverest computer scientists, you know. He used to say he didn't know how he got by before I came along." All of which was true. She had only omitted the fact that the reference was almost 2 centuries out of date.
"I will return in 2 hours, the Salatian decided.
It departed then, and Polly was disappointed, but not too surprised, to hear the sound of the door being locked behind it. Alone now, she allowed herself to show all the signs of terror that she had been holding back. She sank onto the bed. The mattress was threadbare, and she could feel its springs, and shook uncontrollably. A minute later, she realized the floor was shaking too, vibrating to the rhythm of distant engines. She could hear a throbbing hum. The ship was taking off, and Polly shivered at the thought of being separated from her crewmates and from the TARDIS by an interstellar distance. For the first time, she thought about what her life would be like if the Doctor and Ben couldn't rescue her. She felt helpless and very alone. Ben shook his left foot, trying to rid it of the sensation of pins and needles. His action unbalanced Daphne, and the circle swayed and shifted again. He was becoming impatient, and he itched to do something productive. The deadline for the hotel's destruction was looming. More importantly, every second they delayed sentenced Polly to another second in the Salacian's company. Thomas had reported that she was boarding the creature's warcraft before he had been stricken by a sudden fault and had blipped out of existence.
The computer must have requisitioned his power supply, the doctor said gloomily. No doubt for some death trap or other.
Look, Doctor, said Ben, what are the chances of turning your sonic gizmo there into a remote controller? Not hopeful, I'm afraid. Not without more equipment.
And if he goes feeling inside any machines, he might get his hands fried off, said Terry unhelpfully.
So what are we going to do?
I've come to the conclusion, said the doctor slowly and with reluctance, that the sonic device is our only hope after all. I'll simply have to complete it to my original specifications.
So one of us will have to go to the door to use it, said Hornby. Oh, that's a good one, snorted Dorothy. We all sidle over there together, do we? And what if the computer electrifies the lock?
It can't, said the doctor. Not if we remain linked. It can't kill one without killing all.
But he didn't sound sure. Then it puts enough heat through coils in the door frame for whoever's touching it to stick, said Dorothy, seeming to relish the gruesome image. Or it blows up the locking device in his face.
You've made your point. Whoever picks the lock will be exposing themselves to danger, I admit.
Despite the warning, Ben was cheered by the prospect of taking practical action. Right, only one of us is at risk, yeah? Well, I'll take a 1 in 6 chance. If you can get that thing finished and show me how to use it, I'll get us out of here. He tried to break free of the group, but, while Daphne let him go, Terry held on stubbornly. Are you mad? She remonstrated, pulling him back into line.
She's right, Ben, said the doctor.
The Salacians were ready to kill you, remember? Ben pouted. You're going to try yourself, aren't you? The doctor phrased his reply carefully.
Under normal circumstances, yes, I would rather place myself in jeopardy than anyone else. But then I have become rather a focal point for our friend's anger.
Dorothy laughed. Listen to our courageous leader. He wants some idiot to put their life on the line, but it's not going to be him. He's right, countered Hornby. If the Salacians chose anyone to die, it would have been the doctor. Or you. So it makes sense for me to do it, said Ben firmly. He pulled away again, and, this time, he managed to throw off Terry's restraining hold. Daphne looked momentarily lost and afraid. Then she clutched at the lifeline of her old school friend's free arm, and the circle was closed, with Ben on the outside. He hesitated then, not sure what to do. He felt cold, and not only because his shoulders missed the heat of warm bodies pressed against them. It had been easy to sound brave when he hadn't really thought through the consequences, when he was just reacting as always to an opportunity to prove himself useful in an environment in which he was otherwise lost. Now, having isolated himself from the safety of the group, he had to deal with the real possibility that he had condemned himself to a death which he probably wouldn't see coming. "No!" the doctor shouted. He pushed and pulled and almost toppled the whole circle as he forced it around until he was facing Ben. "You're almost as likely a target as I am. What if the Salacians want to punish both of us by murdering you and making me watch?" What if, scoffed Dorothy. "Are you going to keep us here all day playing guessing games, or will you let him try it? Look on the bright side. If the computer incinerates him, the rest of us know we're safe." The doctor ignored her.
"Taking unnecessary risks isn't brave, Ben. In fact, it's a very stupid thing to do."
Ben was stung by his forceful words, although the concern from which they were born was very visible in the doctor's face and manner. "Someone's got to do it," he muttered. He turned his head away sullenly, but found himself facing a life-sized effigy of a green, humanoid, tortoise-like creature. Its eyes, too, seemed to accuse him. And I won't let you volunteer. I won't. I won't complete the device for you. Ben sighed and made a show of acceding. In truth, he was glad by now of the excuse to go back on his ill-advised plan. Before he rejoined the others, though, he stooped to pick up the abandoned half-completed device. He was frozen by the doctor's strangulated cry. "It's still connected to the main power supply," he said, indicating a stretch of multicoloured wires back to the gutted terminal. "Touch that, and you'll give the computer the best shot it could hope for." He backed off, eyeing the tangle of components as if it could bite him. The doctor disengaged himself from Hornby and proffered his hand. "Hold on to me. It can't send a current into you then." Ben obeyed and reached for the device again. Despite his lifeline, he flinched from touching it at first. Then he lifted it gingerly by one corner and almost flung it back to the doctor, who, in turn, clasped it with both hands and gave it a vicious yank so that the wires came free at the other end. Ben rejoined the circle between the doctor and Hornby and watched as his companion performed an engineering miracle with no tools but 2 hands and a screwdriver. At one point, he popped the handle of the latter into his mouth and craned his neck to prod at a tiny circuit board nestled in one palm. Ben couldn't imagine how he could work accurately under such conditions. His arms twisted and squirmed so that it was difficult to keep hold of him, and Ben's ribs regularly became the unwitting targets of his flailing elbow. Dorothy suffered similarly, but she was quicker to complain. At last, the doctor tossed away a handful of wires and brandished the remainder, now twisted into an insane conglomeration. It looked, thought Ben, as if he had cooked up a plate of spaghetti using wires instead of pasta, and had pulled out a handful at random. But he had faith in the doctor's abilities. It would work. "It's ready," he announced, "or as ready as it will be. It has a limited, self-contained power source, but will burn itself out after a few seconds. We'll only get one chance." "Which leaves the question of who'll use it," Ben reminded him. "Ah, yes." "I've been thinking," said Hornby in a quiet voice. "And I don't know if I can. I mean, I attacked the Salacians twice. What if they've decided to take revenge and put my name in the computer?" "Ha, so it begins," said Dorothy. "Anyone else got an excuse to give? We might as well just sit down and wait to die. How about you, Daphne, dearest? Fancy going to heaven before the rest of us?" "Oh, I couldn't," Daphne squeaked. "I'm sorry, I couldn't. I just know I wouldn't be able to make my legs move. They feel like jelly already. I'm sorry." "There's no need to be," the doctor assured her. "It's a great deal to ask." "Which only leaves one. What is it to be, Ms. Willis? Developed an unexpected paralysis? Looked cross-eyed at any sharks lately?" "I'll do it," said Terry, as if to spite her. Ben's stomach sank, but he told himself not to intervene. Logically, Terry was the best choice. Apart from Daphne, she was the least likely person of them all to have been marked for death. Still, he railed inwardly at the unfairness of a situation that forced her, of all of them, to put her life on the line. He actually caught himself wondering how he could survive without her, but he made himself deny the thought. He couldn't stay here. "Are you positive about this?" the doctor asked. "I know what I'm doing, and somebody has to do it." Terry left the circle and moved slowly into Ben's field of vision, stopping before the doctor. "Then it's appreciated," he said, handing over the sonic device. Terry wasn't looking at him, though. Her attention was reserved for Ben, and the doctor watched in polite silence as they stared at each other, but couldn't quite bring themselves to speak. "Well," said Dorothy finally, "are you going to spring the lock, or are you just waiting for it to melt in re-entry?" Tearing her gaze from Ben, Terry turned and began to walk across the room. After 4 confident steps, she faltered and looked back over her shoulder. Her hard features were softened in a wash of red light. and Ben wondered if he would see them again. He tried to convey sympathy and encouragement in a simple glance. He remembered how he had felt upon leaving the circle himself, and he imagined she was experiencing those same awful sensations. There was a tight knot in his own stomach, but as she took another tentative step and then another, it began to unravel one strand at a time. At last, she reached the doors without incident. The worst moment of all came then, as she reached out hesitantly and, in a teeth-clenched moment of decision, clamped her hand onto the metal handle. Ben flinched and closed his eyes involuntarily. But she didn't cry out. She didn't fall. She turned instead, and the flicker of her lips betrayed the beginnings of a relieved smile. "All right, Doctor, I'm here. Now, how do I work this thing?" The Doctor had begun to allow himself hope. On his directions, Terry had held the sonic device against the doors and oscillated it through a range of frequencies. She dropped it as it heated up and eventually destroyed itself. However, it had endured long enough to do its work. They all heard the clunk of the Salation's locking mechanism disengaging, and an even more satisfying thump as it hit the floor outside. The Doctor congratulated himself and resolved to begin work on a permanent version of the device when he got back to the TARDIS. It would circumvent so many complications. "Don't touch the doorframe," he warned everybody, as they threaded their way out of the bar in a chain. "Now, watch out for anything that might be used as a weapon. Ventilation grills, electrical appliances, anything, and give them a wide berth. Keep hold of each other, stay as close as you can, and walk slowly." "Not too slowly. We've got about 15 minutes left." "I'm well aware of that, Mr. Hornby, and it should provide ample. We'll take an elevator to deck B1. Terry, you aren't in danger from the computer, so I want you to operate the controls." "Okay." Terry moved ahead and pressed the call button. At which point Daphne screamed. The group broke apart instantly. The Doctor felt Ben's hand leaving his, and he cried out in panic, "Stay together!" But his lone voice went unheeded. Daphne and Dorothy had both leapt for cover, while Terry and, more unwisely, Ben were scrambling to place themselves in front of the others. Thomas had materialized in the doorway of the interplanetary bar. But he looked different. He looked dangerous. His insubstantial form was fizzing with energy, and discharges like miniature lightning bolts leapt from him to die in the air around him. His expression was twisted into a dark grimace of loathing, and the Doctor's fear was almost eclipsed by his astonishment that the Adler's program was powerful enough to enable the computer to do this. There was no time to do anything but take shelter, as electrical fire crackled in Thomas's eyes. But, a split second later, the Doctor experienced the heart-stopping realization that he wasn't its intended target after all. He could only yell out his anguish as twin bolts of high-voltage death were let loose from the holographic vampire's eyes, and struck Ben Jackson full in the chest.